The Prism of Lyra, An Exploration of Human Galactic Heritage by Lisa Royale and Keith Priest, 1992. Preface. It was not the mixture, O men, of blood and breath that made the beginning and substance of your souls, though your earthbound and mortal body is framed of those things. But your soul has come hither from another place. Empedocles. From the earliest days in Earth's recorded history, there has been a bittersweet emotion that wells up within us as we gaze into the expanse of the night sky. Some of us long for the day when the human race can travel beyond the stars. Is it really just a hope for the future rather than a remembrance of our past? The human consciousness has intricacies that still remain unexplored. What stirs us to push evolution to its limits? What drives us to create dissension between the races on our planet? Perhaps it is possible that we're playing out a cosmic drama and have only temporarily forgotten the script. We know that what one country or race does upon the earth affects another. This idea may also spread outward into the universe. Perhaps what we do here affects countless other civilizations on other planets. Could we really be all that linked together? The information presented in this book is a compilation of years of insights, deductive reasoning, and channeling. Meticulous cross-referencing of various channels has been conducted, primarily using the work of co-author Lisa Royale, as well as research into a number of respected anthropological and metaphysical works. The reader may consider these ideas to be literal or symbolic, for the story is the same. There is no claim that this is the ultimate truth of our galactic family's emergence into this reality. If it works for you, use the insights given here as a catalyst for your own growth. If not, perhaps it can lead you one step closer to your own personal truth. One of the most important ideas to accelerate the human potential is the allowance of all truths to be manifested of the one truth, whatever it may be. Through this allowance emerges unification. If nothing else, let this book be fun to read, interesting and stimulating to your imagination. Your belief is certainly not required, but your willingness to be an explorer is. This is an introductory book. An extensive glossary has been created at the end of the material for any unfamiliar terms that may have been used. Each chapter represents a different facet of an intricate tapestry and how the tapestry affects Earth. Through many discussions, the information has been honed down into a framework that will introduce the reader to a cast of characters. The cast is not complete. There are countless other members and dramas being played out throughout our universe. These characters have emerged as the ones who seem to matter most to the human drama here on Earth. There are certain assumptions carried throughout the material that are a foundation for the rest of the information. One of these is the idea of reincarnation and the infinite nature of consciousness. It is not necessary to embrace this concept in order to grasp material, but it will allow the reader a more expanded view of the bigger picture. Another assumption presented is the idea that each being possesses a higher awareness. It is purported that regardless of the level of existence a being has chosen for a given lifetime, it retains an awareness, conscious or subconscious, of its connection to the whole or its divine identity. This concept connects us with the idea that it is we and we alone who control our destinies. Therefore, evolution is in our own hands. Throughout the entire book, the assumption will also be carried that the whole, or the integrated mass consciousness of our galactic family, has always existed. For the purpose of the information presented, there will need to be some set parameters. These parameters will allegorically refer to the beginning of the story as being the dimensional infusion and the end as the integration. In many cases, labels have been used to denote places or people, such as Sirius or Surians. In general, these labels are fluid, more denoting a realm or vibrational awareness than a fixed idea. In a case such as Lyra, for example, the possibility is respected that the very stars spoken of have become black holes and white holes many times over. Therefore, these can be spoken of as ideas rather than concrete points in time and space. These ideas carry weight. This is quite apparent in our legends that give importance to other star systems. The Dogon tribe legends, the Sumerian texts, and the ancient Egyptian writings all claim contact with beings from other star systems. These legends must come from somewhere. Though their language and contemporary style of expression differ slightly, the consistency of their content is beyond argument. Information about the past of the human race can enrich our lives here on Earth. If we are to truly transform, it will be through the infusing of awareness into our world, not using the awareness to escape from our responsibilities as citizens of Earth and the galactic family. Chapter 1. Dimensional Infusion. With its celestial keys, its chords of air, its frets of fire, the Samayan's great Aeolian lyre, rising through all its sevenfold bars, from Earth into the fixed stars, Longfellow on Lyra from occultation of Orion. All consciousness and energy was once fused into an integrated whole. This whole was aware of aspects of itself, but in a different way from individualized consciousness. In Earth's present development, the self is recognized first, then society, and finally the whole, all it is, our God. Separation is still created. This separation from the source is an illusion. This illusion is a tool that provides the whole with all the necessary lessons and challenges it needs to experience in order to reintegrate back into the source. Before this fragmentation from the source, the whole existed in another octave of dimensional reality. From this realm of unification, portions of all that is wandered, what it would be like to fragment and temporarily forget integrated existence. The force of this thought on such a mass level began to create a fragmentation. The illusion created from this fragmentation would be a challenging forgetfulness in which consciousness would need to create from its own divine nature the remembrance to once again unite. What has been termed creation is indeed this fragmentation, or more descriptively, the dimensional infusion. The whole's initial curiosity about a fragmented existence actually created the reality itself. It required a shift in perspective, focus, or frequency. As part of the whole, aspects of the galactic family were partially responsible for laying out the blueprint that was to guide their development. Therefore, the statement, "we are God," actually has viable meaning. The blueprint that was laid out contained many different ideas. It first held the notion that polarity and fragmentation would be the norm. The encoding of the blueprint provided the option of free will on the part of each fragment or soul. The challenge was in remembering that each consciousness possessed it. The more free will is used, the more divine memory is invoked. When faced with a polarized reality, free will becomes the liberator. When a soul forgets it possesses free will, the lessons become much more challenging, yet quite rewarding. Another idea present in the chosen blueprint was that fragments of the whole would be entirely responsible for their actions during this state of amnesia. Whether or not it was remembered, every action taken would generate a response from the universe. Some have called this karma. However, it is much more than an eye for an eye. Instead of punishments for negative behavior, there is always the option of expanding one's awareness. Therefore, in a sense, wisdom erases karma. Though this may sound like the rules for some kind of cruel cosmic game, the outcome has already been decided. With this in mind, it is not necessarily the destination that counts, but the journey along the way. It is literally how the game is played. Another blueprint agreed to was an etherically generated code built into the fabric of the universal tapestry. This code would allow bipedal, carbon-based humanoid forms to be the normal, naturally developing vehicle for the incarnation of human-type consciousness on planetary structures. This code exists on meta-atomic levels that science is just beginning to learn to measure. The symbology of polarity plays out in the human body form. The Earth human is symmetrical, with 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, ears, etc. The body is joined into a whole by a torso and a head. It was also decided that during the evolutionary development of humanoid forms within the Earth's galactic family, that the male and female polarities would manifest in separate but complementary body types. This serves as a reminder that in order to create, polarities must always be joined or integrated. The notion is widely held that an individual has a tendency to feel most at one when he/she is joined with another in love. What was the actual process of the dimensional infusion? There exists within the time-space fabric of the constellation Lyra what can be called a white hole. Compare this white hole to a prism. In passing a beam of light through a prism, one gets a spectrum of light fragmented into 7 visible color frequencies. When a portion of the whole passed through the Prism of Lyra, the white hole, consciousness was fragmented into 7 vibratory frequencies that represent the mass consciousness of Earth's galactic family. Each fragment becomes conscious on all of these different frequencies or densities. Frequencies were previously experienced as being integrated into the whole, like white light. When this portion of the whole passed through the prism, it manifested as 7 aware frequencies. Consciousness also fragmented, and the fragments moved away from each other, as the Big Bang theory symbolically suggests. The illusion thus arose that each fragment was very, very alone. The whole understood that the purpose of this experience was to learn to reintegrate from a point of separation. But how? As individual souls or in groups, the fragments sought out the universe that was just created. The dimensional infusion not only created a consciousness fragmentation, but it also created the stars, planets, gases, and molecules that make up physical reality. However, physical reality represents only a few of the energy frequencies that emerge from the fragmentation. As science has discovered, matter is densified energy vibrating at a specific rate. Every aspect of the universe is made up of energy. In Earth technology, it has not yet been discovered how to measure certain portions of reality. If technology possessed this ability, an infinite number of gateways into time, space, and dimension would be seen. For the time being, the 7 frequency levels that Earth's galactic family fragmented into by passing through the Prism of Lyra will be explored below. From this point forward, the term density will be used to reference these frequency levels. First, density. Awareness as a point, physical matter. This frequency level is the most basic. It provides the matter and energy for the creation of atoms and molecules. The basic life forms of mineral and water, for example, are all operating from first density frequency. Humans possess this frequency within themselves as well. It makes up the basic genetic codes. Second density, awareness as a line, biological matter, development of group or species identity. The consciousness expressed by second density vibration does not possess self-awareness or ego. Most species within the plant and animal kingdoms exist here. However, their placement and density depends upon many additional factors, including the presence or absence of ego. Third density, volumetric awareness, ego, loss of group identity, development of individual identity, ability to remember past and cognize the future while retaining present awareness. This is the density where human beings emerge. It is a vibration that creates the illusion of separation, and thus a challenge toward awakening. Presently, humanity is going through a transition period into fourth density reality that can account for the many rapid changes the human race is undergoing. This is the frequency that expresses the most separation from the whole. It is from here that many lessons about integration are learned. This is the most intense of all levels in its cultivation of growth within the self. Cetaceans, dolphins, and whales presently exist simultaneously in third and fourth densities and are transitioning out of third along with humanity. The consciousness of primate exists in third density as well. The evolution of primates is becoming increasingly apparent as one begins to observe them displaying several characteristics that were once thought of as indigenous only to humans, such as language acquisition and pathological behavior. Fourth density, containment of volumetric awareness, superconsciousness, reintegration of group identity without loss of ego. As vibration increases, perception of past, present, and future become more fluid, along with the ability to interface with multidimensional and multidensity realities. Negatively oriented consciousness becomes more difficult to maintain. Presently on Earth, fourth density reality is overlapping third. In humanity's case, this can account for the increased desire for unity, peace, and unconditional love, as opposed to the illusion of separation that characterizes third density. The vibratory rate of one's reality is stepped up, and therefore one may be faced with personal issues in a much more rapid and intense way. It is easy to see how this is coming into play with the thousands of individuals upon Earth who are in therapy, in substance abuse programs, and engaging in humanistic efforts to better the planet. This is the frequency of responsibility. This is the frequency when one begins to remember the encoding of free will. This is a last frequency where physical bodies are the vehicles for the expression of consciousness. Hence, many civilizations choose to spend long periods of time within this density. Fifth density. Experiential awareness of I as a group identity, not bound by linear time. In this density, sentiment consciousness begins to awaken to its heritage. This is the density of wisdom. As one awakens the wisdom within, they very often want to share it with those who are still focused in the lower densities. Many from this realm choose to become guides for others. A fifth density being emerges with its family of consciousness, oversoul, or higher self, if you will, and begins to remember. This is the first density in which a non-physical orientation is experienced. Note, there is no clear-cut distinction when transitioning from fifth, sixth, and seventh densities. Because these densities are not physically oriented, there is much blending in these transitions. Sixth density. Awareness as the dimension itself. This is often called the Christ consciousness, in that it displays a frequency level equal to that of Christ or Buddha. From this frequency, a total remembrance occurs, and one begins taking responsibility for the whole rather than the self. The process of progressing the self and progressing the whole become one and the same. Seventh density. Awareness as the multidimensional experience, group matrix identity, social memory complex. This is the frequency of total oneness or integration. Those who vibrate into this frequency are merged in identity and become a mass conscious whole. They magnetize those in other frequencies and provide the current for the natural flow towards integration. Once the seventh density beings reach critical mass, they will progress to the Prism of Lyra. From our point of view, it will be a black hole exit point and reach the next octave, where another adventure awaits. It is important to note that as portions of the whole fragmented through the Prism of Lyra, each consciousness retained awareness on all density levels. However, part of the forgetfulness remained. From most highly focused density levels, such as third and portions of fourth, an unawareness may occur concerning the coexistence of other levels. As integration occurs, one becomes aware of these other aspects. The microcosm always reflects the macrocosm. This is visible in the coincidence of how atomic structure mirrors the structure of the solar system. It is the same within the fragmentation of portions of the whole into individual beings or soul groups. When one incarnates into a physical body, it can be likened to a mini passage through the Prism of Lyra. The process of soul fragmentation as one incarnates physically can be likened somewhat to Freud's id, ego, and superego theories. As a fetus, the soul demonstrates a first density consciousness. At that point, one is aware of itself as intricately connected to the environment. Physically, one has a mass of DNA codes with the potential to become a conscious human being. Since Freud did not take his hypothesis into prenatal development, there is no correlation. If he were to have created a label that described the fetus's relationship to its environment, then it would have been first density description. When the child is between birth and 2 years old, she begins to demonstrate second density consciousness. A separation begins to be perceived between itself and the environment, and its desires become externalized. There is still somewhat of an egocentric point of view, which correlates this development level with the id. What distinguishes a child's second density orientation from third density is the lack of a distinct ability to differentiate between itself and the environment. From approximately the second year of life onward, third density consciousness becomes the primary framework demonstrated. This is the development of the ego and the awareness of the child as a separated individual. These are crucial formative years. One can see that if development is disrupted, such as through abuse, the personality can fragment and perhaps create dysfunction later in life. Many individuals retain this third density consciousness orientation of ego throughout their entire lives. The development of the superego, or higher awareness, is a typical fourth density trait. humans have the option to develop this aspect of themselves. This is reintegration of the fragmentation of personality that occurs through the birth process, as well as integration on a spiritual level. As the human race begins to move more solidly into fourth density consciousness, it is suspected that this personality fragmentation process will become less apparent, and perhaps children will begin displaying fourth density characteristics earlier in their development and retain them throughout their lives. In childhood, one must learn to adapt and integrate into a workable framework. If one cannot do this, such as the instance of child abuse, psychological disorders will very often be displayed when adulthood is reached. Pathologies such as multiple personality disorder can occur because the natural third density personality integration process did not occur during childhood. Some extraterrestrial civilizations have learned to detect and transmute the seeds of pathological disorders during childhood, and therefore have no incidence of adult pathologies. If it is understood that no matter how far an individual fragments, either on a soul level or in their personality, and that way back home is always through integration, she will never lose sight of the goal. In this case, we can go home again. Chapter 2. Creation of the Galactic Family. I am from Ra, from whom time began. I am the hub of a wheel, a day star hovering over an endless sea. I am not the harvest, I am the seed. I am not the lyre, I am the song. I will not pass away. Egyptian Book of the Dead, Ellis translation. In passing through the Prism of Lyra, the first fragmentation created a group of beings that can be called the Founders. The Founders embodied the group consciousness of what eventually became humankind. They can project a very high level of fourth density, but their natural state is non-physical. In splitting off from the portion of the whole they passed through the Prism of Lyra, they still retained a memory, if somewhat dreamlike, of the idea of integration and the purpose of fragmentation. It is they who orchestrate humankind's evolution. They play the roles of the parent archetype in male and female polarity balance. The Founders become aware of the blueprint that was chosen as they fragmented from the whole. From this blueprint, they knew that children carry the encodings of the parents. Since they played the parents' role, it was their responsibility to influence the growth of the new consciousness about to be created. In doing this, they became the blueprint, began to understand and live it, knowing that this would encode future fragments. The Founders began to understand the natural energy patterns of the polarized reality just created. It became obvious to them that the newly fragmented group consciousness interfaces with specific realities, i.e. densities, within three main points. 1. A point of pure positivity. 2. A point of pure negativity. 3. The integrative point of the two. All interactions occur within the lines that connect each point, with very few aspects of consciousness existing within the points of purity. This realization inspired them to understand a paradigm of polarized reality, which was something exciting and new to their understanding. The paradigm, as it emerged for them, is shown below in a two-dimensional diagram. Both negative and positive polarities moving toward integration. As they pondered the paradigm, they began to understand the mechanics of how the fragmented consciousness would once again merge back through the Prism of Lyra. The linear model above can be changed to bring about the triadic relationship of the template. This triad represents the probabilities in the integrative process. Civilizations naturally move randomly according to the laws of chaos within the triadic template until a balance of energy is reached. If a civilization or consciousness chooses integration, the willingness to grow from both polarities, they will naturally move toward the integrative point, fueled by the momentum of both polarities. This can be viewed as an allowing form of integration. If, on the other hand, a civilization or individual refuses integration, the template expands to accommodate their denial of the opposed polarity. The expanded template will not be outlined here at the present time. When they believed they were ready, the Founders began another fragmentation. Just as a portion of the whole became curious and created this realm from its thoughts, the founders emulated their parents and exerted thought energy to create a fragmentation of themselves. This fragmentation occurred far and wide. Individualized consciousnesses sprang from the founders' group awareness and began to explore the universe. Because of this fragmentation, every being existed in the galactic family presented here as part of the founders. There are an infinite number of fragments and explorational journeys. Some of these fragments grew into civilizations that have played a part in the development of Earth. Some of those who have a reference point in Earth's known reality will be explored in the chapters ahead. When the founders fragmented, some allowed their energy to densify sufficiently in order to enter a physical reality. The founders had already chosen planets that could support humanoid life. Then they gently guided these fragments into a physical third or fourth density existence. After time passed, the fragments became more accustomed to physical existence, and assistance from the founders, who still existed in smaller numbers, became less needed. The first area to be eventually colonized after the founders' fragmentation was in general vicinity of the Lyra constellation. Most of the galactic families that has genetic connections to Earth has roots in the Lyran system. It was there that the first attempt at integration occurred. The founders thought that it would be easy and predictable. Instead, human life forms spread outward exponentially until a very intricate tapestry was woven. The threads of the tapestry began to become entangled until eventually the origins of the thread became lost in the colorful haze of the tapestry's design. The following are the main characteristics displayed in this tapestry from the perspective of Earth. Lyra. There are a general area birth of the human race. All humanoid races in our galactic family have genetic roots connected to Lyra. It is the symbolic harp upon which the song of humanity is played. Vega. A star within the constellation of Lyra. Descendants of Lyra. Vega birthed a race of beings who manifested Lyra's opposite polarity both in their beliefs and actions. There were frequent conflicts between the Lyran and Vegan races. Apex planet, a planet within the Lyran system, which was the first attempt at creating an integrated society. Sirius, a trinary star group. It is known in Earth mythology as the Dog Star. Sirius was one of the first areas to be colonized by beings from the Lyran star group. Sirius embodied the energy of the triadic template, perpetuated the drive toward integration. There is a large variety of consciousness types that incarnate in this system. Orion. This is the main battleground for the challenge of polarity integration, seeded from Sirius as well as Lyra and Vega. There is a direct connection with Earth, as explored in later chapters. Pleiades. Colonized by Lyran offshoots. This group is Earth's main genetic connection from extraterrestrial sources. Arcturus. An archetype or future self-ideal of Earth. Arcturus assists in healing personal and planetary consciousness. In vibration, primarily sixth density, has been attributed to the angelic kingdom. Zeta Reticuli. This civilization is intimately connected with Earth. The Reticuli are the primary group instigating abductions, or more accurately called temporary detainments, since this group always returns the abductee. More will be said about this group in later chapters, though some of these civilizations overlap each other in time and may not appear linear. Below is a linear translation of the progression of various cultures in comparison to each other. Discussion. Once one recovers from the initial shock of the idea that extraterrestrials had something to do with Earth's heritage, it really seems like a very logical explanation. Why would the human race egotistically believe that it is alone responsible for Earth's genetic past? Upon Earth, races have discovered new races and have begun integrating with them. Perhaps before this occurred, these races never knew the others existed. This model can hold true for the universe as well as planet Earth. How many more ancient drawings of rocket ships and their pilots need to be found before humans can break through the fears about discovering Earth's past? The most obvious question is this. If the extraterrestrials are out there, why don't they show themselves? An answer can be found in humanity's approach to anthropological studies upon Earth. Scientists do not go marching right into a primitive culture waving their cameras and equipment. These types of cultural assimilations sometimes take them decades to accomplish. In its own eyes, humanity may seem civilized enough. However, to a race that has achieved space travel and perhaps even global unity, humanity may seem primitive indeed. Perhaps they are waiting, hiding in the bushes, allowing only a few humans to see them until the signal goes out to the whole of society that they are not a threat. What if the signal that they are there never goes out to society? What if humanity continues to ignore the evidence, hoping it will go away? To many of the extraterrestrials, this seems to be the case. All non-threatening methods seem to have been unsuccessful thus far. The primary game plan over the last few decades appears to be much more profound in its potential to awaken humanity. Some of Earth's visitors are now using fear. At times, society is so quick to validate negativity rather than positivity that humanity's own framework may now begin to be used to assimilate Earth to its previously denied reality. Fear awakens, rather rudely at that. Perhaps that explains the growing observation of extraterrestrial abduction experiences as a method of awakening humanity to a greater reality. At humanity's level of development, a model for the natural evolution of a planet has not yet been formulated. It seems obvious that a civilization would not be able to reach the cosmos and the folding of space-time dimensions if it cannot resolve its conflicts on a planetary level. The expansion of consciousness required for such a leap may be dependent upon the unified whole. If the whole is not integrated and balanced, attempts may be fruitless. Humanity may be experiencing this limitation now, with so many unsuccessful space launch attempts as well as space programs' budget restrictions. Earth may not be ready. Humanity wants to reach for the stars, but very often cannot even reach for the hand of its neighbor. The extraterrestrial connection is important, but what is even more important is developing a global perspective. Expansion will come from action, the claiming of responsibility for Earth by humanity itself. The extraterrestrials will not intervene to clean up humanity's mess. Earth is entering adulthood and has been kicked out of the nest. It would serve humanity to release its victimhood, claim its divine birthright, and create heaven on Earth. The extraterrestrials can only remind humanity of its unlimited potential. Their communication and our awareness of Earth's heritage can be likened to a dangling carrot. If the human race wants that carrot, perhaps it must do what it needs to be done to get it. Unify and integrate. Chapter 3. The Womb of Lyra. When I become, said he, the becoming became. I have become the becoming. I am one, seeing myself divided. I am 2 and 4 and 8. I am the universe in diversity. I am transformations. This is my coming together. Here are my cells become one. Egyptian Book of the Dead, Ellis translation. From the point of view of a reality that can be perceived by physical beings, the form of the founders has 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, and a torso. They possess large, inquisitive eyes as a symbolic representation of their desire for knowledge and the ancient memory they carry within them. Physical beings would view them as insect-like, very tall and having long, graceful limbs. Third density humans can perceive them if they enter an accelerated version of fourth density. Interactions with them are usually able to occur in an altered state. From this state they appear etheric and dreamlike. Having fragmented their consciousness further, the founders began solidifying energy into matter. This created a prototype physical race into which the majority of humanoid consciousness would incarnate. On metaatomic levels, organizational codes exist which create a consistent humanoid-type body in a carbon-based environment as the vehicle for physical representation of consciousness. The founders used this naturally occurring code to assist them in creating versions of themselves in both physical and non-physical states. This form symbolically reflected the aspects of the polarized universe they had entered. Again, it is represented of the idea that parents create children in their own image. This idea is reflected in Rupert Sheldrake's work with Morphic Resonance, which shows there There are energetic fields that organize all form. These fields can pass on characteristics to unrelated aspects of the same species that are not necessarily in physical proximity to each other. The founders are the energetic grandparents of the human race. It was their desire to manifest different dimensional aspects of themselves. This would produce root forms of life, which would facilitate the process of creating diversity within the new reality that was just born. They are both the source and the prototype. As they emerged into this light form through the densification of energy, they became aware that all life will once again evolve back into the founders and then into source. Consciousness will scatter and fragment, sometimes beyond recognition, but it will evolve back into the source physically as well as mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Thus, the founders began the next step of the fragmentation process. Their first action was to begin making the plans necessary to spread life throughout the Lyran system. They were aware that over time the life forms would naturally gravitate into planetary civilization by means of attraction. Planets were chosen within the Lyran star group to house these new races. As these planets naturally began to develop primate life, the founders seeded these developing primates with plasmic energy on metatomic levels within their DNA structure. This occurred over many generations until the primate humanoids possessed the genetics necessary to sustain the higher vibrations of third density consciousness. With slight alterations, the incarnation process was soon to begin on several planetary bodies. The founders fragmented themselves further in order to release the consciousness necessary to incarnate on these planets. As this fragmentation occurred, each consciousness was magnetized to a specific planet, where the vibrations were more compatible with the individual fragment. As expressed in the previous chapter, the basic template of the consciousness that fragmented through the Prism of Lyra can be considered a triad. It represents one polarity, its opposite, and the integrative point. The founders observed this natural flow of energy emerging in the base species that were developing. These different planetary groups were initially homogeneous, not yet manifesting any single aspect of the template in any obvious way. As time went on, interactions between individuals and groups increased. Many groups polarized into either negative or positive orientations. Some groups began to display varying degrees of integration. This scenario was expected by the founders. However, the process began to take on a life of its own. As the process grew exponentially, the founders began to see the infinite reflections of the whole, and to some extent it became overwhelming to them. As these groups evolved and achieved space travel, they exposed themselves to the development of other planetary groups in the area. Cultures began to mix and grow. New philosophies were born. For a period of time, the Lyran races rapidly developed advanced technology, expansive philosophy, and strong social development due to the interactions between these planetary cultures. Then the dynamics of the template began to be displayed. Polarities began to solidify, generating their own polarization that continued exponentially in turn. Negative polarities began splitting and manifesting their own negative-positive roles. Positive poles did the same. The feminine expressed its masculine, and the masculine expressed its feminine. Polarities exploded like viruses within a previously blossoming civilization. The simple set of mirrors that the founders had created shattered into infinite fragments. They had lost direct contact with many of the genetic windows, physical beings, that they had created. The physical beings had now taken on lives of their own. Although the original programs continued to be an underlying factor influencing their development. The first group to develop as a specific non-Lyran species was the Vegan civilization. They formed a highly distinctive philosophy and spiritual orientation, and began to isolate themselves from the Lyran races. They were initially a negatively oriented civilization, expressed as the negative pole of Lyra, because they had adopted a philosophy of service to self, contraction. Lyra itself may be considered the positive pole because all other civilizations were born out of it, expansion. As time passed, friction grew between the people of the Lyran races and the vegan civilizations. Neither group was expressing in an integrative way. Both possessed within themselves the conflict of polarity. Neither group was right or wrong. They all played out the same ideas, only from a different perspective. They just could not understand how to balance their energies. Polarization continued to grow exponentially as they grappled with the relationship between their civilization and themselves. A third civilization began to emerge from the Lyran races. Because this planet was the apex of a symbolic triangle of integration, playing out both negative and positive polarities, it can be called the apex planet during this stage of its development. Later, it becomes a much more intricate piece of this galactic puzzle. The apex planet began its civilization by drawing in characteristics from both the Lyra and Vega polarities. Genetically, they were a mixture. Within their race, diversity was even more widespread than upon their present Earth. There were dark and light-skinned people, pacifists and conquerors, artists, musicians, and soldiers. Even in comparison to our Earth race, they did not coexist peacefully at all. Separation began occurring in the culture until the entire planet was engulfed in the friction of polarity. No resolution was in sight. The future of this apex planet seemed hopeless. They eventually allowed pollution and weaponry to nearly destroy their world. When opposite polarities are forced, not integrated, they cause fusion. This fusion manifested on the apex world as nuclear war. A small number of inhabitants secured themselves underground, but the remainder perished from their own ability to integrate. What occurred on a planetary scale was quite interesting. From a point of observation in space, it appeared that the planet destroyed itself. From the point of view of the survivors who went underground, they were very much alive. As a result of their nuclear explosions, their planet was eventually propelled into an alternate dimension. After the cataclysm, radiation upon their world remained quite high, which forced them to stay underground. Once they recovered from their emotional shock, it became time to pick up the shattered pieces of their lives. Their development and their amazing transformation will be explored in further chapters, for they play a vital role not only in the transformation of planet Earth, but in the galactic family and the founders as well. Meanwhile, the Lyran races and the vegan civilizations were continuing with their development. Groups of Lyrans wished to remove themselves from the friction with Vega and sought out many other areas to colonize. Groups of vegans also escaped their planet's conflicts and founded a number of civilizations, including Altair and Centauri, which will not be addressed in this material. Gone were the clear-cut lines of traceable philosophical and genetic history. Humanity was spreading quickly, carrying with it the seeds of experience and polarity. The goal was always buried deep within the souls of each being, and it gently nudged them onward. The goal was, and still is, integration. It is apparent that the beginnings of the entrance into polarity by the founders was not easy. They had created an equation that they expected would conclude according to their calculations. As with the new science of chaos, the movement of energy between these three civilizations, Lyra, Vega, and Apex, became unpredictable to the founders. The entire galactic family could only wait and watch, knowing that in chaos there is order, divine order. These early lessons may have been imprinted into humanity's etheric memory as a reminder of all that has been and all that it can become. Humanity is never alone in this struggle. The founders still wait silently. They exist not only out there, but also within the soul of humanity as its most basic archetype. The cycle of life and existence is merely a circle. The beginning and end are the same. When humanity feels the call of evolution, it is the founders whispering through the expanse of time and dimension. They are a part of humankind speaking to itself. Perhaps it is time to listen. Chapter 4. The Sirius Factor. Blazing as the star that cometh forth at harvest time, shining forth amid the host of stars, in the darkness of night, the star whose name men call Orion's dog. Brightest of all is he. Yet for an evil sign is he set, and bringeth much fever upon hapless men. The Iliad. He comes richly dight in many colors. M. Martin, 1907. The realm of Sirius was one of the first to be explored by the curious consciousness that passed through the Prism of Lyra and fragmented from the founders. Sirius represents a very important symbol for the entire galactic family, that of the Triad. Though it has not been scientifically validated by most astronomers, Sirius is a trinary star group. Symbolically, this represents the template, two polarities at the base of a triangle and the joining or integrating of the polarities at the apex. It reflects the basic foundation of the galactic family's desire to once again unify through the merging of polarity. After the infusion, many consciousness who chose to remain non-physical attracted themselves to the realm of Sirius. Here they began laying the physical as well as non-physical groundwork for the vital role Sirius was to play in the unfolding drama. They were to become some of the earliest genetic and etheric engineers following in the footsteps of the founders. Anticipating what was to come, these non-physical Sirians began forming through the transmutation of energy into matter a third density world that would eventually be able to support physical life. They also created more vibrational focused realms for the consciousness that would choose to exist there in the non-physical state. Thus, because of their ability to create realms suitable for all manifestations of consciousness, they became known as the Elders of Sirius. During the Lyran and Vegan conflicts, representatives from both polarities inhabited the Sirius realm with the desire to integrate there. The Elders of Sirius prepared for an influx of both positive and negative energy. They were quite aware of the scenario that needed to occur. The Vegans who chose to inhabit the Sirius realm decided to incarnate physically within a third density reality. Culturally, they were highly polarized in the masculine, and their philosophy was one of domination, which was becoming more difficult to maintain in fourth density. They felt they must dominate their environment and control their evolution. According to them, this would allow them a mastership of their realm, and from that point their evolution would then progress at an accelerated pace. From this desire, the Vegans began plans for their colonization of a planet orbiting one of the Sirius suns. If they were to maintain their philosophical orientation of domination, the natural polarization inherent in this philosophy can only be perpetuated in a third density existence. They were to be tightly focused in the physical, creating a veil of illusion and forgetfulness, even more dense than presently on Earth. They were so sure of their own abilities, and so unaware of the lure of third density separation, that they zealously began speeding up the evolutionary process of the primate-like species developing on the world that they had chosen. As soon as the DNA of the indigenous species matched their desire, they began incarnating. Almost immediately, these new Sirians lost their memory connection with Vega. Their veil was too dense. Their desire to create forgetfulness was so strong that they remembered nothing of their origin. They did not dream, they did not meditate, they did not pursue creative activities except to maintain their structure of domination. When their zealousness translated into physical reality, it created a culture driven by the desire for domination over each other and the universe around them. As this negative Sirian planet was developing, a group from Lyra decided to venture outward into the Sirius system. These beings chose to remain in the non-physical realms. Their orientation was polarized toward the idea of service to others. They were particularly interested in the physical healing of those in pain. The combination of the negative Sirians who denied their spiritual self and the positive non-physical Sirians originally from Lyra who felt it was their duty to heal all those in pain created a dynamic of tension that echoed throughout the Sirius system and beyond. The saga began. The positives began bombarding the negatives with love and healing energy on the subconscious and unconscious levels. Because the negatives were so tightly focused, this created psychological pain for them. The more the negatives resisted, the more the positives sent healing energy. Friction occurred from this interaction that there was very uncomfortable from all consciousness in the Sirian system. The Elders of Sirius finally intervened. It was decided that the conflict would once again be moved to another locale. This time integration would be attempted from a slightly less polarized perspective. The Elders sought out a home for this conflict. It did not take them long to discover the electromagnetic properties of the area called Orion. Thus the myth begins of how Sirius the Dog Star leads the way for the hunter Orion. Once the initial conflict was removed from the Sirius system, the physical civilization remained. They had cut themselves off from the spirit even to the point of death, where an immediate reincarnation of the system occurred again, further alienating them from any form of non-physical existence. Therefore, most of the negative society was unaware of a conflict, so they could not be made aware of its movement into the Orion system. Their society continued within its haze of forgetfulness. Those desiring the negative-positive integration now went to Orion from Lyra Vega instead to Sirius. Sometimes, very infrequently, a soul would awaken from the negative Sirius world and progress to the Orion arena. From the positive, non-physical Sirius perspective, they would now be able to directly influence the alien negatives. Many joyously ventured to Orion to carry out this task. Others chose to remain within the Sirius realm, concentrating their healing abilities toward other goals. Other positives from Lyra joined the Orion struggle. Galactic history was born. Because of the positive Sirians' desire to facilitate physical healing, their service to physicality instead of choosing incarnation, they allied themselves with the energies of Arcturus. Arcturus is oriented toward the idea of emotional healing. Together they form the Sirius-Arcturus matrix. This matrix has found its way into nearly every physical planet within the galactic family as a holistic energy representing the healing of body, mind, and spirit. Planet Earth has known the Sirius-Arcturus matrix in many forms. It is an archetypal energy that is used by an individual or society for many purposes. It is malleable and can be shaped into an appropriate definition. Whatever shape, it is devoted to the service of physicality. The Sirius-Arcturus matrix reminds the fragments of their connection to the whole and their natural abilities for self-healing. Though it is only a small percentage, a group of positive Sirians decided to incarnate into physicality as well. However, they rejected the humanoid form for a form that is more representative of their nature. This form is the cetacean. Dolphins and whales represent a translation of Sirius energy upon a physical polarized world. In archetypal symbology, water represents the subconscious. Cetaceans are there silently in Earth's oceans and in the sea of humanity's subconscious. They remain as a reminder of humanity's potential for integration. Of all the energies that are part of the immediate galactic family, the Sirius energy is most widely used upon Earth. The name Sirius means the sparkling one or the scorching one, also called the dog star and the Nile star. Perhaps because it is the brightest and the second nearest star visible to Earth, 8.7 light years away, many ancient cultures recognize the importance of the Sirius energy, most notably the Egyptians. At times, Sirius consciousness may choose to densify its frequency to become visible to third-density humans. During many of the Egyptian densities, it was quite common to have a visitation from a Sirian in the disguise of one of the other gods, such as Isis, Osiris, and Anubis. These costumes made it easier for the Egyptians to honor their presence, and often the visitations triggered memories of the very early days when the gods walked openly upon Earth. These Sirians gave the Egyptians, as well as other Earth cultures, much advanced astronomical and medical information. Even today, scholars are still questioning the origin of this information. Halfway across the globe, the Mayan culture had its own unique relationship with Sirius. Advanced medical practices and galactic astronomical information were imparted to them that presently have not been unraveled by modern scholars. Theirs was a much more personal relationship with Sirius. These Mayans were, in a sense, tourists from the Sirius realm, incarnate here on Earth who wanted to experience physicality from a closer vantage point. Their relationship with the Mayans was so intimate that the Sirians actually shared with them technology of transmutation, from matter to pure energy consciousness. When their lessons were complete, the Mayan race vanished, transmuted, leaving behind a trail for humanity to follow. These Sirians left behind many time capsules and puzzles for future generations to discover. One of these puzzles is the crystal skull. This crystal skull can represent the infinite nature of man and consciousness. Looking into its depths, one can sense the past and future. Humans have not yet learned how to translate the data and emotions that are triggered when one gazes into its expanse. Perhaps one day information encoded within the skull may ignite sparks of memory within humanity, as the Sirians have possibly intended. There are one of the primary groups who in many forms have left the clues about Earth's past. It is important to note that the Sirians are not meant to be spoken about as a group of extraterrestrials as much as a group of consciousness expressing itself both physically and non-physically. They have been a guiding force for the developing civilization upon Earth. As will be explored in later chapters, they are one of the primary characters in the creation of the human species on Earth. Returning now to the negative Sirius planet, Earth has an analogous translation of its philosophy. The practice that is called black magic, or the dark arts, is rooted in the philosophy of the negative Sirians. Within the Egyptian culture, the organized worship of the negative force took place within the temples and priesthoods of Set. This philosophy rejects the idea of reinclusion in the universal fabric. Those that practice this philosophy consider themselves unique, separated, and egocentric. The illusion that they have created is one of non-responsibility for their actions. It often takes them many lessons and sometimes many lifetimes to recognize that their actions and their beliefs create the very reality from which they are trying to escape. In translation, another manifestation of the Sirius influence on Earth from a slightly negative perspective is the Illuminati. The Illuminati are a group of physical and non-physical negatively oriented and even some positively oriented extraterrestrials who came to Earth as physical beings during the inception. The Illuminati are not only comprised of Sirians, other groups such as Orion are part of the Illuminati structure. These beings eventually felt that they did not get the recognition or power that they thought that they deserved. Many of these early off-planet consciousness who interacted with humanity had allowed their energies or their histories to evolve and become an archetype to assist Earth. The idea of control is their identity. If they cannot control others, they feel as if they do not exist, and they are terrified of non-existence. These beings represent only a small percentage of Sirius consciousness. Since the Earth inception, the planet has developed some very strong positive relationships with Sirius beings who have been some of the main supporters of humanity. This motivation has caused them to attempt to interfere in Earth's developments from the start. As with an annoying insect, they are a bother but rarely cause serious problems. Only the individuals who have no sense of their own power will be found in those power structures upon Earth that stem from fear of powerlessness. They cannot be an influence if one does not allow them to be. It all comes back to the issue of claiming one's power. One final idea concerning contemporary manifestations of this Sirius energy has to do with the appearance of menacing extraterrestrials as seen in UFO literature. For the most part, severely negative UFO experiences, cattle mutilations, and the Men in Black phenomena are connected to the negative Sirius and Orion group, who actually generate more fear than damage. At times, the physical Sirians and Orions can break through the layers of protection in the solar system and try to wreak havoc. What is their motivation? In exploring the ancient Sumerian texts concerning early history and the nature of the conflicts of the gods, one gets a clear idea that Earth, in whole or in part, was involved with issues of territorial dispute by various groups at different times. The question has often been asked why the Sirians seem to be so involved in Earth's development. If it is indeed true that Sirius is a trinary star group, as the Dogon tribe's astronomical tradition suggests, could it be that Sol, or Sar, is or was once the third star? If that is the case, Earth may have been part of a territorial dispute among the Sirians from its very inception. This could explain why the negative Sirians consider it to be their right to do as they wish on Earth, and why they point an accusing finger at other terrestrials for wrongly interfering with Sirian internal affairs, thus creating many historical disputes. The Sirians may consider Earth to be part of their territory. In present times, Sol is only 8.7 light years away from the Sirius system, which has been considered by astronomers to be part of their local star family. Many of the early Sirians were once quite adept at genetic engineering. During the Earth inception, the physical Sirians placed a latent DNA code within their early humans. When Earth beings reach a certain vibratory frequency as a race, this code will begin to be triggered. This code will assist those on Earth in remembering humanity's galactic past. Contemporary negative Sirians are terrified of this. They have continually kept themselves from transitioning into fourth density for fear of non-existence. They fear that if Earth transitions, they will transition also and cease to exist. They believe that they keep society in fear. Earth will not be able to make the shift. As a whole, they cannot determine humanity's fate. For Earth, humans have more power than the negative Sirians realize, but they will continue. They know no other way. Whether dealing with physical extraterrestrials or archetypal energy, the Sirian identity is entwined with humanity's. It is rich with knowledge as well as challenge. One must always remember Sirius is the triad and what it represents. Integration from polarity, which is the density of Earth. Chapter 5. The Winds of Orion. Begirt with many a blazing star stood the great giant Algabar, Orion, hunter of the beast. His sword hung gleaming by his side, and on his arm the lion's hide, scattered across the midnight air, the golden radiance of its hair. Longfellow. Canst thou bind the sweet influence of the Pleiades, or lose the bands of Orion? Job 38:31. When two opposite polarities meet, they are naturally attracted. When they attempt fusion, rather than integration, they produce a force of enormous energy. They produce sparks, they produce change. Sometimes they even produce pain. This was the case with the civilizations of Lyra that attempted integration with the Vegan and Sirius star systems. The conflict began playing out there, but was energetically expanded to include Orion. Its beginnings were as a Lyran conflict. Through generations it evolved into a new race's war, that of the Orions. As generations passed, each side lost touch with what they were fighting for, yet the anguish continued. The stakes were clearly marked. The negative side perpetuated the idea of service to self. Within their philosophy, if one served the self, the whole was served. What they did not realize was that they were denying the whole by the way they chose to carry out this philosophy. This translated as the need for domination. These were dark times indeed. Domination entailed behavior that Earth humans have never experienced. Genetic manipulation of bloodlines was common, an attempt to dilute or concentrate power. What humans know as black magic was a common practice. Beings were so saturated with their own fear that they struck out all who were different. The Earth legends of sword and sorcery are dim remembrances carried out in the etheric cell memory from the dark times of Orion. The positive side epitomized the idea of service to others. It was their belief that the only way to survive was to be subservient, even to the expense of self. So an interesting dynamic was played out here. There were those individuals who were the dominators and those who were all too willing to play the victim role. These positives felt that to support the whole, they must serve the whole and relinquish the self. In reality, they were denying themselves as being a valid portion of that whole. The Orion Civilization was one of the very few that evolved into a state of technological advancement while still being in a state of intense spiritual conflict. Aeons of time passed while the dramas continued playing out. It began with a basic emotional manipulation all the way to the other end of the spectrum. Manipulation using highly advanced technological tools. Reincarnatically speaking, the same tools incarnate time and again, switching sides, trying to find a way to bring the whole struggle into balance. Within Orion history, there has always been underground resistance. Throughout the ages, its strength ebbed and flowed like the pulses of the red giant Betelgeuse. Usually, they would be discovered by their negatives, disbanded, and punished. Any time they built upon some momentum, it radiated too loudly and they were found. As the velocity of the resistance solidified, it became apparent that they needed to squelch the radiation of their ideas. They decided instead to symbolically absorb. They allowed people to come to them. They became like a black hole which was unable to be seen, but the force and momentum of their energy was so powerful as a silent wind. Their organization was thus called the Black League. The symbol of their struggle became the Black Dragon. A new aspect of the drama began to unfold. Now there were three facets to the struggle. There were the dominators, the victims, and the resistance. Fueled by the friction of the two polarities, the Black League became quite successful in thwarting the efforts of the dominators, known as the Orion Empire. However, it was only enough to reduce their momentum as a standstill. An energy impasse was reached. Within the souls of these repressed people existed a great desperation. They knew the extent of the Orion Empire's control. The Empire had devised ways to control astral bodies. Death was no longer freedom. Many individuals studied with heretic teachers to learn the ancient knowledge of dimensional consciousness travel. Few were successful, but those who were found a way out of the Orion system forever. Through focused concentration and disengagement from the Orion mass conscious belief systems, a small percentage of the individuals were able to leave their bodies, die, and successfully target or home in on the beings who had escaped or were reincarnated on Earth from Orion. The Orions had the ability to target Earth's individuals in Earth's past, present, and future. Once these beings were targeted, the Orion entity was able to create a window through which he/she could travel. When he/she came through that window and incarnated on Earth, that being became lost in the Earth mass consciousness. This was a safety mechanism. If they did not know their own identity, they could not be pursued by the Orion Empire. The escapees then entered Earth's reincarnational cycle and most likely continued to play out the Orion drama unconsciously within their soul patterns. At times, they could have been immediately pursued through their window by Orion Empire representatives. Often these Empire representatives became caught in Earth's mass consciousness as well, and had to enter the reincarnational cycle. When they incarnated, they carried their old Orion desire to control with them. As the desperation grew, the Black League decided to fight even harder. They had people who played both sides. Smuggled reports from informants resulted in an even more intense resistance effort. They began to employ tactics borrowed from the dominators. All this was done in the name of freedom. They eventually learned that freedom was elusive, and the conflict intensified. With all their efforts, the Black League could not understand why they were not being successful in liberating the victims. They became discouraged. The people hungered for a form of spirituality. But all that was present was a gnawing emptiness and fear. Nothing worked. For a few generations, the Black League remained stagnant. Only an idea and nothing more. Then something miraculous occurred. During generations of spiritual gestation, a seed began to grow. A soul incarnated who embodied all the hopes and dreams of the Orion races and had none of the hatred or fear. When he was born, he was safely contained in an energetically and emotionally neutral environment, deep within the planet so he would not become polarized. At adulthood, he began to teach. What he taught began to shed new light on the struggle. What he proposed could end it once and for all. He taught universal laws. Positivity cannot be achieved through negativity. The Black League was fighting fire with fire, only creating a blaze instead of peace. One must integrate positivity and negativity to the balance point. One must love, not fear. The idea of peace and freedom must be loved so much that one is willing to live it in one's soul despite outside manifestations. The Black League thus learned that their intentions were good, but their actions only caused more of what they despised. This realization occurred on mass levels. It opened new doors of spirituality for the people of these oppressed worlds. They had a long way to go, but at least they knew where to start. Once the dynamic began to be understood from higher levels, it was decided that they would transmute this energy by moving outward into the galaxy and starting fresh. From these higher levels, they called upon the founders to assist them in choosing a world. Of primary concern was an assurance that all the tools were provided on this new world for these adventurous beings to gain transmutation of the Orion energy. Free will choice was the primary tool, as well as a latent DNA code that would trigger a desire for societal preservation if it became possible for them to self-destruct. The world that was chosen was Earth. The founders then began engaging various physical groups to carry out the Earth inception. Earth was manifesting the Orion drama in an attempt to balance polarity throughout humankind's history. The fall of Atlantis, the Roman Empire, and the ongoing religious wars are all examples of memory patterns from Orion that are emerging to be cleared. Throughout all of these dramas, the human race has survived and has kept total oppression at bay. Humanity continues to play out the same dynamic: victims, perpetrators, and resistance. However, this time light is beginning to spread, and even the resistance begin to learn early on that they can't fight fire with fire. The contemporary Orion Civilization, existing in the same time continuum as present-day Earth, has already healed its conflict, because Earth is still playing out Orion's past in an attempt to balance it for itself. The primary contact humanity receives from Orion has been judged to be negative. The Men in Black phenomena, as well as some manifestations of the Illuminati structure, are playing out the past Orion need for control. The Men in Black, MIBs, have several origins. Some are human incarnations from Orion and or negatively oriented Sirius energy. Others are actual past Orions who have traveled forward in time to present-day Earth. These include Empire representatives who are caught in Earth's mass consciousness as they pursued Orion's escapees. They perceive Earth as a threat. From their point of view, as humanity awakens and liberates itself, it magnetizes the oppressed Orion beings to seek freedom here. They want to keep these windows of opportunity closed for the victims of Orion, keep Earth unempowered, and stay in total control. The MIBs are only one manifestation of this idea. Generally, it is played out on Earth in a much more subtle way. Those individuals who carry out the oppressive patterns from Orion act from their old soul memory and are not necessarily conscious in their desire for absolute control. In researching 20th century MIB encounters, one comes across the ironic behavior of these beings. They function at a very autonomous level and seem to never claim for themselves the power that they so single-mindedly attempt to wrest from humans. This may suggest that the MIB is only a pawn of perhaps an even more bizarre power struggle. The Orion drama is not an experiment done to someone by someone else. All those who choose to be part of the Earth transmutation do so through their free will. This transmutation integration will affect the entire galactic family created through the dimensional infusion. This would initiate the beginning process of the integration back through the Prism of Lyra. The integrated polarities can thus be termed the Orion light. There were stages built into the transmutation project from which the founders would be able to gauge its progress. The first stage was a simple seeding and developing of third density life into a strong genetic strain on Earth. The subsequent stages involved various development of civilization. The crucial stage is occurring presently upon the Earth, the mass reawakening of millions of souls to a greater spiritual purpose. This awakening occurs naturally and begins to accelerate a widening of the gap between the positive and negative poles, as seen presently within society. The accentuation of this gap serves to polarize and highlight the choices society may take, making it clear that choices must be made at this point in time. Humanity does not have the ugliness and pain of a tormented past to the extent that the Orions had. As Earth reawakens, all the tools become visible for humanity to claim responsibility for the whole and the self. The painful Orion memories may continue to surface, but the healing of them will occur through humanity's proclamation of freedom and choice. When the dimensional infusion occurred, there were some individual and group consciousness who chose to remain dormant. They allowed themselves to serve as archetypes. They could be awakened as needed. Some even allowed fragments of themselves to incarnate. An example of this is the consciousness known as Merlin. During the time of the Orion drama, the friction between the two polarities awakened the sleeping magician. He became the guiding force in the drive to integrate from both a physical and a non-physical point of view. Fragments of his consciousness would incarnate intermittently to spark a memory of the past and a vision of the future. He has gone by many names on many worlds, but he always mirrors one's own beauty as well as one's ugliness. His energy has been present in association with Earth right from the inception. The Earth inception will be examined more thoroughly in the coming chapters. For the time being, it must be shared that this drama has been created to be a success. Most who incarnate upon Earth are involved to a varying degree in the Orion drama. Everyone is here by choice. The instant that one begins to operate from a belief that humanity is here against its will is the instant that personal and planetary power has been surrendered. Chapter 6. Earth's Palladian Cousins. Many a night from yonder ivied casement, ere I went to rest, did I look upon great Orion sloping slowly to the west. Many a night I saw the Pleiades rise through the mellow shade, glitter like a swarm of fireflies tangled in a silver braid. Tennyson. During the early development of the Lyran system, the first friction between the polarities began to occur. Some Lyrans manifested the idea of the feminine polarity, intuitive and allowing. They believed the path to reintegration was through inner development. Other Lyrans, however, polarized to the masculine. Their philosophy upheld the notion that in order to evolve, they had to dominate the known universe. This caused much dissension between the two. As the Orion Civilization developed, a group of Lyrans decided they would prefer to develop their culture away from what they perceived were negative influences. Thus they searched the galaxy for a new home. In their search, they found a young planet rich in natural resources. This planet was Earth. For several generations, this group resided on Earth. coexisting peacefully with the developing primitive race. However, over a long period of time, they found that they were not adapting to Earth's physical and electromagnetic environment as well as they desired. During this time, they incorporated small amounts of genetic material from the primates to assist them in assimilating to Earth's environment. Over generations, their DNA changed slightly, allowing them to become more adapted to Earth. While these Earth Lyrans were incorporating primate genetics into themselves, other groups of Lyrans were on the planet to carry out the Founder's wishes as well as their own, by inserting Lyran genetics into the primates. The arrival of these Lyrans refueled the conflicts the Earth Lyrans initially escaped from, so they chose to find another planetary system to colonize. Desiring to build a new culture where they could become isolated from old conflicts rooted in their past, they explored the region widely before they decided on an open cluster of young blue stars known as the Pleiades. When the Pleiadian star system began to be colonized on Earth by Earth Lyrans, it was intended to be a very balanced, independent race. This was reflected in their choice of a new stable star cluster. More than anything else, they desired to create a culture based on harmony, truth, and unconditional love. Once the colonization plan became known, those of Lyran descent who desired a new home decided to colonize other areas of the Pleiades star clusters as well. Visibly, you only see 7 stars in the Pleiadian system. From the Pleiadian point of view, there were hundreds of stars with habitable planets unseen from Earth, which make up the Pleiadian colonies. These early Pleiadians, the previous Earth Lyrans, possessed highly developed intuitive skills, as well as an inbred desire to create a community lifestyle. The whole was as important as the self. Even with this desire, it took these beings generations to mature and create their own identity separate from the Lyran roots. For generations, they developed this new culture, which was philosophical in nature and technologically progressing at a rate perfect for their development. Though there were several periods of conflict, the cultural base that these new Pleiadians created remained stable for many thousands of years. Over generations, the community-oriented Pleiadians began to favor peace and tranquility so much that they learned to invalidate all forms of negativity. Deeper and deeper they submerged their natural humanoid tendencies until a great emptiness appeared within their being. There was no conflict, resolution, or learning. A voice cried out from within them. There was a portion of them that desired to be heard. From this well of despair they reached out to their Lyran forefathers. When the call was answered, the Lyrans were surprised to find a culture that had virtually cut itself off from creation. The Pleiadians had no knowledge of what was occurring in the universe around them. They were unaware of the anguish of Orion, even though they were both descendants of Lyra. When the Pleiadians were made aware of the Orion struggle, their own sleeping dragon awakened. They felt a passion. Once again they felt alive. A deep mission was sparked within their souls. They offered to be of service within the Orion struggle. It was then that they committed themselves to fighting the Orion negativity. Thus it began. They entered the Orion struggle through many vehicles. Some souls chose to incarnate directly into the system within both polarity orientations, positive and negative, in order to understand the struggle. The majority of these Pleiadians incarnating into the Orion struggle became ensnared. It is easy to enter the Orion reincarnation cycle, but virtually impossible to escape. Others chose to ally themselves with the Black League or continue to incarnate with the Pleiadian system in an attempt to contain the expansion of the Orion Empire. They fought with every ounce of their being against the negativity they saw around them. Unconsciously, they also fought the negativity still further within themselves. The struggle continued. The Pleiadians fought as zealously against the Orion negativity as they did their own latent shadow selves. Instead of finding the truth within, they only perpetuated their hatred of their own negativity. It was only when the Orion Empire destroyed one of their populated planets that they disengaged themselves actively from the Orion struggle. The lifeless charred planet still stands in their system as a reminder of their past actions. When that planet was obliterated, the Pleiadians were devastated. Finally, an impasse was reached. On the highest levels of being, every consciousness involved in the Orion drama took a step back. They evaluated the situation. It became obvious that the resolution needed to occur from a different angle. They agreed to extend the conflict to another arena within the galaxy. The Pleiadians were faced with a choice. Would they return their energies to their homeworlds, or would they agree to resolve their own issues as well as the Orion struggle once and for all? Initially, they chose to return home. This allowed them to gather their strengths and search the very depths of their souls to find a way to become whole. They were so afraid of the negativity that they became immobilized. They waited, they pondered, and they faltered. While they waited, the Inception project began in full force upon the Earth. The Lyrans were the physical directors of the project under the founders, accepting assistance from other physical groups such as the Sirians. It quickly became apparent that they needed a genetic structure of terrestrial as well as extraterrestrial origin for their Inception project. They contacted the Pleiadians. At first, the Pleiadians expressed reluctance about becoming involved with Earth once again. However, the Lyrans pointed out possible Pleiadian benefits with deft craftiness. Knowing that the Pleiadians had originally incorporated Earth primate genetics into themselves, the Lyrans admitted that they needed certain aspects of Pleiadian DNA for the developing terrain species on Earth. Unknowingly, they also created a way for the Pleiadians to face their negativity once and for all. It was proposed that a DNA transfer from the Pleiadians into the terrain species over a long period of time would create a race of humanoids who would be terrestrial but would also have extraterrestrial roots. The closest ancestors of these Earth humans would be the Pleiadians, and through these family ties, the Pleiadians would be allowed to be involved with the Earth species development. During this involvement, they would observe the developing race, interact intermittently in order to keep them on course, and learn about human negativity. This vicariously would heal the pain of the Pleiadian past. After some reluctance to associate once again with the Lyrans, a group of Pleiadians finally agreed. From this agreement came thousands of years of Pleiadian interaction with nearly every primitive culture upon the Earth. Drawings of space beings and spacecraft adorn many cave walls, and many ancient documents record the actions of these gods who came from the sky. They saw themselves as gods no more than today's humans do. However, from the point of view on a primitive people, they surely must have seemed like gods. During certain development stages of a humanoid species, it is common to give up personal power to a godlike or magical figure. This became widespread, and soon the Pleiadians began to relish the power they were given. They began to wield it. Some began using fear in order to manipulate. Their soul-level agreement to learn from the developing Earth transformed into a satiation of personal desire. Many ancient myths concerning jealous gods are directly linked to these extraterrestrial beings from other systems, including the Pleiades. Examples of these myths include the Egyptian accounts of Set and Osiris, as well as the Sumerian conflicts between Enlil and Enki. These seem to be archetypal battles. Many cultures have legends of similar figures that can be considered counterparts, or perhaps a translation of one story. When these power binges occurred, it was necessary for these extraterrestrials to be reminded of their purpose. Very often resentment built up on the part of the Pleiadians toward other visiting groups. For a period of a few thousand years, the Pleiadians grew in power, and then were consistently reminded of their place. The irony of the situation soon became known to them. They had wished to get in touch with their negativity. Their wish had been granted. During these interactions, the Pleiadians involved with Earth were all from the same time continuum. Their contacts were consistent with their development. They had not yet mastered the complex technology of time-space manipulation. It wasn't until the 20th century that Earth has begun to pull in Pleiadian contact from many different time frames simultaneously. Though contact continued intermittently until the present day, it has slowed down in comparison to earlier times. Most Pleiadians no longer consider Earth humans to be children, and they allow humanity to make its own choices. Once Earth began its technological era, it was watched very closely for the critical mass necessary to activate the DNA code for preservation of the species. Since the 1940s, both physical and non-physical extraterrestrials have been monitoring humanity and attempting communication, mostly in subtle ways. The Pleiadians were the first to begin a major benevolent contact program physically with Earth. Although this was quietly carried out as early as the 1930s, it began to be noticed on a wider scale in the 1970s. There are indications that negative groups, such as the Sirians, began contact in the 1930s as well, and the their negative actions were always countered by the more benevolent groups, such as the Pleiadians. This heavy contact activity by both positive and negatively oriented groups appears to occur in 20-year cycles, 1930s, 1950s, 1970s, and as we will soon perhaps see, the 1990s. A Swiss named Billy Meyer has documented hundreds of hours of communication with the Pleiadian cosmonaut Semhaze, who also possesses a large number of photographs in the Pleiadian spacecrafts, which, using photographic technology, had never been proven to be false. He claims to have taken both backward and forward in time by the Pleiadians and their allies, the Dolls, to view various events. This contact had caused major controversy since it was revealed. Meyer had been provided with evidence by the Pleiadians themselves, such as a metal sample which was analyzed on film by a noted IBM scientist. The analysis revealed an unusual combination of materials, including a rare and expensive element called thulium. Also, when analyzed further, the sample seemed to display properties of both metal and crystal. The metal sample subsequently disappeared, but the film analysis remains. Within the UFO research community, this case is a classic example of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Because it is too easy, it is considered to be fraudulent. When Meyer attempted to construct models of Pleiadian spacecraft to see if the photographs could be faked, the models were found and the whole case was labeled a hoax. The teachings in the 1970s from Semhaze and her associates are now beginning to be more widely known. They teach spiritual truths, as well as give a partial history of the Pleiadian race. Some teachings warn of impending natural and man-made disasters connected with a new age to come. It seems that these Pleiadian beings were from an orientation in their history where warning humans about approaching cataclysms was part of their contact philosophy. Though these teachings may have been applicable when they were given, one may question how they relate to today's mass consciousness. There are indications that the mass consciousness of Earth made a shift from a future of disaster to one of increasing responsibility during the time period of 1980 to 1982. Since these Pleiadian teachings were given before the shift was made, perhaps they represent an old idea. It does not necessarily mean that they are not valid, but it does mean that perhaps there is a different outlook coming to humanity instead, one which reflects the choices and changes humanity has recently made on a mass conscious level. The Pleiadian contact coming to us presently, both in physical and telepathic forms, may echo a different voice. Some claim to be the future descendants of Meyer's Pleiadians. These Pleiadians speak openly of their difficult past and why they felt they needed to use certain tactics in dealing with Earth. They admit to having their own motivations for contact and thank this planet for all that they have learned. They are helping society to shed light on other forms of contact in which they themselves are not directly involved, such as negative abduction experiences. They are sincerely assisting humanity by whatever means they can, allowing the planet to achieve a global as well as galactic viewpoint. The Pleiadians have specific reasons for being tentative in their present interactions with Earth. For thousands of years they have stepped in either to protect us from danger or to control us like children, for our own good. Some splinter groups even manipulated humankind for its own purposes. This has been a source of great shame to them. They now realize that humanity must make its own choice, and they must trust the human ability to do so. They have created a karmic cycle through their interference. For their growth, it is imperative that this cycle be relinquished. The thought of perpetuating the pattern of interference on Earth is the single most fearful idea facing a Pleiadian. Will Pleiadian contact with Earth continue in the future? Since they are the most similar to the Earth human physically, in fourth density form, it seems appropriate that they have become one of the first to walk this planet undisguised. They stress, however, that as much as humanity might want to meet its cousins from the sky, they will not initiate an open contact program until humanity can embrace its brothers across the street. It is up to this planet. It is humanity who is calling the shots. Are we finally ready to let go of the fear of recognizing our heritage and accepting their outstretched hands?